This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Burkina Faso reels from militant attack that left more than 130 people dead. ECOWAS delegation in Mali a day after coup leader Colonel Assimi Goïta was sworn in as interim president. And the DRC begins phased return of thousands of people displaced by recent volcanic eruptions. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. In business news, Ethiopia's Council of Ministers approves a $13 billion draft budget for the coming fiscal year. And in sports, Tunisia's government steps in to support indebted football clubs and sports organizations. Well, let's begin in Burkina Faso, where it continues to deal with the aftermath of a militant attack which left at least 132 people dead. On Friday evening, militants attacked the village of Solhan, shooting at civilians, burning homes and the local market. The country's prime minister has visited the area to inspect the devastation. Ashtatal has more on this.
Prime Minister Christophe Dabiré's visit to Seba came on the heels of a horrific attack. 12 kilometers away in the village of Solhan, jihadists attacked civilians, burning down their homes. Officials say the attack is the worst in recent history.
This is the first time in our country that we've had an attack with such massive devastation of the population of our country. The president wanted us to carry a message of hope. We've fought against terrorism for some time. We've won victories.
At the Seba Health Center, health workers have been working to treat survivors of the attack.
We received a total of 40 wounded who were admitted to the health unit of Seba, and among the 40 wounded, there are 23 that were able to evacuate at the regional hospital center in Dori. We had heard that some had to continue in Ouagadougou city, considering the seriousness of their condition.
Following the attack, President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore did this morning. He called the act barbaric and said security forces were looking for the perpetrators. During his visit, Prime Minister Dabire urged the population to help the government in its effort to fight terrorism.
Security is the business of the government. This is the business of the defense and security forces. But it's also the business of the entire population. The population must engage with us to ensure that the enrollment of our young people stop, that our young people stay in the country to work for the economic and social development of this country so that we can share the fruits of this development. It's not good that we let these kids go. They'll enlist in terror groups, and it is they who will return to the villages to sow terror and desolation in their own families. We have to fight this.
In May, Burkina Faso launched a military operation to tackle the resurgence of militant attacks. The country has faced repeated attacks, with over 1 million people being forced to flee their homes over the past 2 years. Astatal, CGTN.
A delegation from the West African regional body ECOWAS is expected in Mali for a 2-day visit. This is a follow-up delegation that is led by former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan and includes Ghana's Foreign Affairs Minister. Last week, the African Union and West African leaders suspended Mali from both organizations following a recent coup. This was followed by the swearing-in of Colonel Assimi Goïta as Mali's new transitional president on Monday. The military's overthrow of Mali's transitional president and prime minister last week has drawn international condemnation. The African Union and ECOWAS have been demanding a transition to civilian rule. For more on this, I'm now joined by NABIL AHMED in Accra. Nabil, thank you for joining us. The regional mediators are visiting Mali today. What's the latest?
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Exactly. The mediators led by the former president of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan, will be meeting local mediators in Mali to follow up on the discussions that were held here in Accra over a week ago during the emergency ECOWAS summit, which had to do with the discussion on the second coup by the junta leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta. Now, what they will be seeking to do is to find out whether the recommendations that were put across during the emergency summit are being carried out. Now, one key thing that they will be finding out was the fact that they wanted Mali to appoint a civilian to serve as the new prime minister to oversee the transition plan, and that was supposed to be done immediately. Secondly, they also wanted to find out, they'll also be finding out whether Mali would continue to have the elections next year per the transition plan. Now, we know that this is what the mediator, former president of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan, will be finding out, because after the ECOWAS emergency summit, these are the recommendations that were put out, and he was asked to go back to Mali after a week to find out if these recommendations are being carried out. So we know this will be the discussions that will be held when the mediators touch down in Bamako, Beatrice.
Well, the coup leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, has been sworn in as interim president. This is despite condemnation by the regional bloc, ECOWAS, and other countries. How is this likely to impact discussions during the visit?
Indeed, Beatrice, you recall that when the summit was held here in Accra over a week ago, the West African leaders did not touch on the issue as the fact that the junta leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, was acting as the president of Mali. Now he has been sworn in as the president of Mali, and last week when they held the summit, because they didn't touch on the fact that he was acting as the president of Mali, it was indirectly a move as to whether they acknowledge him as the president of the country, because we know already he was part of the transition government and he was acting as the vice prime minister. Now, what will this mean for Mali going forward? We know that when the junta leader was sworn in just yesterday, he actually has appointed a new prime minister who is in the person of the, he's actually a veteran politician and a leader of the M5, that's Chagel Maiga. He is now the prime minister of Mali. So this particular recommendation by the West African leaders has been carried out by the now president, Colonel Assimi Goïta. So on that front, we would say that not much would be, asked of him, because he's actually done what they wanted him to do. Now, when he was sworn in yesterday, he actually also said that he's going to carry out the transition plan, which include holding of elections February next year. He has already said he's going to do this. So in the discussions, we know that this will be the feedback or the response that will be given to the mediators when they get to Mali. And we will not want to see, we will not expect to see any different changes from all the recommendations that were given after the summit that was held last week, because these are the things that have been actually implemented by the President, Colonel Assimi Goïta. We'll just wait to see if there are other further issues that will be coming up. Beatrice.
NABIL Ahmed Rufai joining us there from Accra. Well, the African Union reacted to the developments in Mali by suspending the country's membership last week. The African Union also threatened sanctions. For more details on what Mali's suspension from the AU and ECOWAS could mean for the country and the region, here is CGTN's Kelechi Emekala.
Mali's second military coup in 9 months is putting the nation in dire straits. The country is having to contend with financial, economic, military and political seclusion. From France's suspension of its joint military operations with Mali to a halt in World Bank funding. Now it's being excluded from the continental and regional blocs, AU and ECOWAS. That has generated mixed reactions among political watchers in Nigeria.
When you sanction a country who suffers from the implication of the sanction. The people on the ground, the citizens of Mali. You cannot give a sanction that will not affect the leadership. The only sanction that will affect the leadership is when you move into that country and overturn.
The ECOWAS and African Union don't have a choice, really, because coups used to be fairly constant, a constant feature in African politics until, fairly recently. So if this new phenomenon is allowed to go on unchecked in Mali, there's a tendency for what is called copycat by other African countries. Democracy is still very fragile in West Africa.
Mali's suspension is indefinite. The West African nation risks facing more sanctions if a civilian-led administration isn't restored. There have been claims of double standards having been applied by the AU and ECOWAS on Mali, compared to how a similar situation was handled in Chad, where major international powers overlooked the military takeover.
Mali is an outright coup, but the situation in Chad is a bit different. Obviously, ECOWAS and the African Union realizing, how tricky the situation is in Chad, probably, closed their eyes to the biological succession rather than having a political situation.
The Mali coup sparked deep concerns over stability in the volatile Sahel region. Thousands have been reported dead and over 500,000 displaced from their homes in the region. Experts say that the AU and ECOWAS sanctions may not be enough to restore civilian rule in Mali. They recommend a stronger and more tactical approach, including dialogue with the military administration in order to restore stability to the fragile political landscape in the West African nation. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And let's go to France now, where the local newspaper Libération has called for demonstrations on Tuesday. The paper is demanding the release of journalist Olivier Dubois, who was abducted 2 months ago in Mali's conflict-hit northern region of Gao. The Jamaat Nasr al-Islam wal Muslimin, a militant group, is believed to be behind the kidnapping. According to non-governmental organization and Reporters Without Borders, in early May, the jihadist group released a video in which Olivier Dubois pleads with his family and the French authorities to secure his release. We'll now cross over to Rose Cullen in Paris for more on those developments. Rose, what is the reaction from Paris on the abduction of Olivier Dubois?
Hi Beatrice, you can see behind me the protest that has been taking place this morning. Those journalists from Libération and also Reporters Without Borders, the group pressing for freedom of expression, have been leading this demonstration. There have been speeches this morning at the protest calling for the release of 2 journalists in Morocco, as well as Olivier Dubois, who is the French journalist who'd been working in Mali for several years, who was abducted at the start of April in the northern region of Gao, and there have been pressure hopefully applied to try to see if there is a resolution that can be achieved for the freedom of Mr. Dubois. He has called in that video that was released last month. It was shot with him in a tent in a desert region, showing him calling for friends, family and the French authorities to do everything in their power to try to secure his release. So today, Beatrice, this protest called to mark 2 months since the disappearance of Mr. Dubois, hoping that a resolution will be achieved soon to allow him to be returned to be with his family.
Well, Ross, and we have seen some political development in Mali itself. We saw the swearing in of Colonel Assimi Goïta as interim president. What is France's reaction to that?
France is not happy at all, Beatrice. It strongly condemned the second coup in 9 months led by Assimi Goïta that took place in May. He has now installed himself as interim president, saying that he wants to see a transitional government. That is something that France has demanded, a civilian-led government in place in Mali for the restoration of military aid. Military aid was suspended by Paris last week, refusing to help Malian national forces, the liaison officers, the planning officers, the French army officers working with, embedded in the Malian national forces, not helping them at the moment. That suspension is still in effect because France wants to see guarantees that Mali is on a path to democratic transition, is not on a path, as Emmanuel Macron has warned, to governance by radical Islamism. That is something that will probably lead France to sever all ties with Mali. It does still have some troops operating in the country, but independently under the overarching Operation Barkhane, which is France's military mission, not just in Mali, but also in Mauritania, Niger, Burkina Faso and Chad, trying to disrupt and dismantle armed groups operating in the Sahel region, as we've been hearing earlier on in the programme. Still some officers operating in Mali, but not working with the Malian national forces at the moment. That has been suspended because of France's adverse reaction to this second coup in 9 months and the disappearance of the journalist as well. The Liberation journalist Olivier Dubois in Mali, also adding pressure on Paris to try to apply even more pressure on Bamako and the military who are now in power.
Ross Callum joining us there from Paris. Thank you. The United States has imposed visa restrictions on Cameroon separatists believed to be undermining peace efforts in the West African country. According to the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, the United States is concerned by the continued insecurity in Cameroon and has called for both sides to negotiate for peace. Cameroon's two Western Anglophone regions have been gripped by fighting since 2017. Separatists have been trying to break away from the predominantly Francophone government. More than 3,000 people have died and 700,000 have been displaced in the violence. Well, at least 200 people were killed last week in Nigeria and over 100 others were kidnapped. It's been one of the worst weeks in Nigeria's recent history of insecurity challenges. Our correspondent Tessem Akende reports from Jos.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has directed security agencies to put a stop to the killing of innocent citizens and rescue those abducted, especially the 136 children kidnapped from an Islamic school in Niger State about 2 weeks ago. This comes as a result of reports of violence across the country in the past 7 days. Last Sunday, an erstwhile advisor to former President Goodluck Jonathan, Ahmed Goodluck, was killed by suspected assassins in the southeastern state of Imo, Nigeria. In the same region and on the same day, about 30 people were killed by gunmen across communities in Ebonyi State. In the country's northern region, the military says it killed 50 terrorists in Borno State, the epicenter of insurgency in Nigeria. About 7 people, including policemen, were shot dead on Wednesday when armed men attacked 2 banks and a police station in Osun State, southwestern part of the country. By Thursday, police reported that 88 people died from attacks by criminals in Kebbi State, while dozens of farmers were killed in Zamfara and Sokoto states. Meanwhile, the Niger State government says it has launched a search and rescue operation for the kidnapped school children. Tessem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead in the program. The DRC begins phased return of thousands of people displaced by recent volcanic eruptions. And rest for the weary. China's wandering elephants take a break from their fascinating march.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The DRC government is starting a phased return of residents who fled Goma. This comes after a volcanic eruption and subsequent tremors caused widespread damage. The government said it would provide transportation to help residents return. The International Organization for Migration estimates that 245,000 people remain displaced in nearby towns and villages. Speaking to journalists, the country's prime minister said seismic activity in the area has improved, but some sites on the outskirts of Goma are now inhabitable. Well, let's cross over to Chris Ochamringa. He's joining us from Kinshasa. Chris, good to see you there. Those affected by the disaster have started returning to their homes. How are they being assisted?
Yes, Beatrice, first of all, many of the people who were displaced by this disaster started returning last week because they found the conditions in the areas where they had sought refuge very tough. And so they came back to Goma and started living with their relatives. But the Prime Minister, who visited the area over the weekend, issued a statement saying they will start the phased return of people after experts from the Goma Volcanic Observatory announced that the threat of another eruption is unlikely, and so they said it's safe for people to return to their homes. So like you mentioned, the International Organization Migration estimates there are 245,000 people who are still living in the areas of Sake, Minova and Ruchuru that are near Goma town, and these people have been getting assistance in terms of food, water and shelter. There has been a coordinated effort by so many humanitarian organizations, the World Food Program, the UN Office for the Coordination of the People and the United States Agency for International Development, to mention just but a few. You know, Goma city is the headquarters of North Kivu province. This is a region that has had a lot of conflict, very many displaced people. So all these international humanitarian organizations there have been supporting people in other health emergencies and the displaced people. So they temporarily stopped what they were doing to support the people of the DRC. The government has also issued a lot of support to the people, and Congolese citizens in different parts of the country have also been mobilizing funds to support the people. So this disaster has really unified Congolese people to support their compatriots who have been hit by this disaster. Beatrice?
Chris Ochamringa joining us there from Kinshasa. Thank you. China has vowed to provide 10 million COVID-19 vaccine doses to the Global Vaccine Initiative known as COVAX, led by the World Health Organization. Our reporter Zhu Xiaxin talks to a senior official on China's vaccine production, which he says is enough to meet the demands at home and abroad.
Dirk Mao, how can China meet its domestic and global demands for its vaccines while ensuring their quality and safety?
We've been expanding manufacturers' output to meet essential demands for vaccinations this year. We've coordinated with relevant departments to advance production capacity, transportation and allocation, and quality supervision. Currently, vaccine manufacturers are racing against time on this, making it China's highest and fastest increase in production. Though its capacity is limited for such a huge domestic demand, China is fulfilling its commitment to COVAX based on ongoing negotiations for deliveries and available supplies.
The WHO has now granted 2 Chinese vaccines, Sinopharm and Sinovac, approval for emergency use worldwide. The approval boosts China's expanding vaccine distribution in the second half of the year as it partners with other countries for production and technology transfer.
We're encouraging more vaccine production lines and vaccine products to be approved by the WHO for further export. There are now 3 enterprises carrying out joint production with 8 countries. 10 more are just around the corner. Our vaccine companies will continue to work with more developing countries on technology transfer.
China joined COVAX in October last year. Health authorities say China has so far sent 350 million vaccine doses to over 80 countries and regions. It says efforts will continue to ensure equitable distribution, especially to developing countries. It also hopes more capable countries will join and support COVAX. Zhou Jiaxing, CGTN, Beijing.
Widespread misinformation and skepticism are reported to be hampering vaccination efforts in the DRC. In early March, the country received 1.7 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine through the COVAX facility. However, due to people hesitating to take the vaccine, the DRC had to redistribute more than half of the doses to other countries to avoid their expiry. Reporting from the DRC's capital, Kinshasa, here is CGTN's Chris Ochamringa.
The DRC has been battling many epidemics for decades due to its poor healthcare system. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the country was struggling to contain Ebola outbreaks. The government declared the end of its 12th Ebola outbreak in May. Experts say it was contained by effective vaccines.
If someone came and then say, look, we have kind of solution, and you guys, we can save your life by getting vaccine. And people, they are ready to get the vaccine because they know there is no another solution. There is no medicine, there is nothing.
But officials have recorded a low COVID-19 vaccine uptake despite getting 1.7 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccines from the COVAX facility in March. Vaccine hesitancy is widespread, especially in the capital, Kinshasa, which has recorded the most cases.
I think a negative campaign against the COVID-19 vaccine on social media is what has caused many people here to refuse to get the jab.
Vaccines are ideally meant to protect us, but the information we've been getting about the COVID-19 vaccines has really scared us.
Some health experts have blamed it on a poor communication strategy by authorities. In April last year, the head of the DRC's COVID-19 National Task Force said they were prepared to take part in any future trials of vaccines against the coronavirus. That sparked an uproar, prompting the government to drop the idea.
And the clinical trial for vaccine, another mistake in communication, to tell people, oh, we are happy to be selected, there's a country where we will perform the clinical trial for vaccine. And the people, this is the way to be happy? We're not animals. We don't even have a lot of cases of COVID in here. They have a lot of cases in Europe and in the United States.
The DRC halted its vaccination campaign in March after some European countries suspended the AstraZeneca vaccine over blood clot fears. When the government resumed the campaign in April, it was barely 2 months to the expiry of the vaccines.
Basically, there is a reluctancy from most of the population here to receive these vaccines at this moment in time. But we're working hard to rebuilding that trust and making sure that people understand that this is a safe and critical way to combat COVID-19.
The government redistributed 1.3 million doses of the vaccine to other African countries before their expiry in June. The DRC is battling a third wave of infections. The government is working on a strategy aimed at convincing more people to accept the COVID-19 vaccine. But with the AstraZeneca jab's main manufacturer pausing shipments to the COVAX facility until the end of the year, the country could have a long wait for more doses. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
A herd of Asian elephants wandering through southern China appears to have taken a break. Storms seem to have slowed their journey. They've stayed put for the last 24 hours in a village near the city of Kunming after traveling some 500 kilometers in more than 40 days. Mike has the latest from Yunnan province.
We have been tracking their movement for the past 10 days, actually. As of the last 24 hours, they haven't moved that much. And as of 5 p.m. on Monday, their last position is still in the territory of Xiyang village in Jingning district, making their stay here into the third day. As of the wandering male elephant who has left the herd on the previous day, he was last spotted about 4 kilometers away from the other members of his family to the northeast, somewhere probably just in these mountains. And so far, people are guessing that it's due to the continued thunderstorms and heavy showers in the Kunming and Yuxi area that the herd has chosen to stay here and have a rest. But that's a theory still to be established. Local forestry authorities have set up another on-site command center to track that male elephant in particular. And also the original on-site command center is also still tracking the other 14 elephants. Both the local authorities and people are treating these animals with the utmost hospitality and kindness. For the authorities, they are using only surveillance drones to keep track of the animals' movement without disturbing them. And also some vehicles have been lined up on Sunday along a local expressway and people were honking to prevent the elephants from entering the expressway and be knocked over. And also because the elephants are here to find food, at least 15 tons of their favorite vegetables and fruits have been put to so-called food points for them to eat, so that they won't go into farmlands and even houses. And also this is to avoid potential human-elephant conflict.
And here in Africa, animal migrations occur on land, sea and in the skies. CGTN's Robert Nagila takes a look at the top 5 animal migrations on the continent.
Unknown to many of us, the largest wildlife migration in Africa takes place over the skies in Zambia. Known as the fruit bat migration, it occurs between October and December, when about 10 million fruit bats descend on the Kasanka National Park's Mushitu Swamp Forest. On land, the longest wildlife migration is found in Botswana. Here, zebras travel close to 1,000 kilometers. Their migration begins in early December between the Chobe River and Xai-Pan. Next, and perhaps the most famous wildlife migration on the continent, is the Great Wildebeest Migration, considered one of nature's wonders. It occurs throughout the year, reaching the climax between June and October. Close to 2 million wildebeest cross from the Serengeti in Tanzania to the Masai Mara in Kenya in search of greener pastures. Between the months of April and June, another little-known animal migration takes place. Millions of lesser and greater flamingo species fly in from neighboring countries to Lake Nakuru and Lake Bogoria along Kenya's Rift Valley for breeding. And between the months of June and November, attention switches to Hermanus in South Africa, where thousands of southern right whales arrive from their summer feeding grounds in the Antarctic. These whales migrate to the area known as Hermanus to mate and give birth. The migration begins in the Antarctic and covers about 5,000 kilometers. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Let's now take a quick look at your business news. Here's what's ahead. Ethiopia's Council of Ministers approves a $13 billion draft budget for the coming fiscal year.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Ethiopia's Council of Ministers has approved a $13 billion draft budget for the coming fiscal year. That's an 18% increase on the $11 million announced in June 2020 as reforms including privatization and improved revenue collection took shape. The budget is set to be one that is in line with the ruling Prosperity Party's 10 years plan, through which the party expects to transform Ethiopia's productive capacity. The Ethiopian economy has taken a hit from what the government calls law enforcement operations in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. The increase was required in this year's Ethiopia's budget due to additional security spending and assisting those affected by drought. The government is also factoring in help for those affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as getting fertilizer supplies to be given to farmers. Meanwhile, the head of Africa's biggest multilateral lender has lauded Ethiopia's economic development and transformation. The Abidjan-based African Development Bank's total ongoing commitment in Ethiopia is about $1.7 billion, covering the key energy, transport and agriculture sectors. From Addis Ababa, here's Girum Chala.
The African Development Bank has invested more than $1,700,000 in Ethiopia in just a few years. And this significant financing has been allocated to projects which concentrate on areas such as agriculture, energy, water, sanitation and transportation. In his visit to Ethiopia, where he met his host Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed AfDB President Akinwumi Adesina said remarkable results are now being seen in all areas.
The African Development Bank has invested in this country $1.7 billion, and we are proud of it. And it goes into areas such as agriculture. I want to thank the Prime Minister and praise the government for what you're doing in agricultural transformation in terms of the integrated industrial parks that you have all over the country. We invest a lot in energy, in water, in sanitation, in transport.
Ethiopia is one of the countries in the African continent with a strong and long-standing relationship with the Abidjan-based lender. Adesina says Ethiopia's continental role has been irreplaceable.
You know, Ethiopia is special when it comes to Africa. And there's a reason why the African Union is actually based here, because this is the place where unity happens.
Adesina also said the bank's investment in infrastructure and energy have created a multifaceted regional impact for millions of people in the Horn of Africa.
We've invested here to help to build the 1,000-kilometer road that links Addis Ababa all the way to Nairobi, all the way to Mombasa, that will increase trade by 500%. We've invested a lot in transmission lines that takes energy out of here to other parts of the region.
The African Development Bank was founded following an agreement signed by member states on August 14, 1963 in Khartoum, Sudan. Since its establishment, the bank has provided billions of dollars of finance to member nations for developmental activities. Many say through that time, the bank has proved to be a key financial institution that has propelled majority of African economies. Grumtara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Kenya's finance minister is struggling to balance two competing problems this week as he delivers the budget statement for the 2021-2022 fiscal year. The East African economy plans to spend over $28 billion in the 12 months starting in June, even though its effective tax revenue base is barely half that. Unemployment levels nearly doubled as a result of the pandemic. Nearly 60% of the banking sector's loan book has been restructured, but the Treasury still plans to spend over 3.6 trillion Kenya shillings in the fiscal year starting in July, even though the country had raised less than $12 billion in taxes by April. Well, Kenya reported its first recession in 2 decades in 2020, with contractions of 5.7% in Q2 and 1.1% in Q3. But the accommodation and tourism sector was especially hard hit, with contractions of over 80% and 57% compared to a year earlier. Despite the job losses and the business closures, cuts to VAT, corporate and personal income tax were all withdrawn by Kenyan legislators in late December. So, what sort of tax and policy support does the restaurant and hotel space in Kenya need to survive? That's a question we put to Leonard Mudachi a few hours ago. Until April, he was the CEO of Big Square, a fast food franchise operating in Kenya. We started our conversation by asking him to give us a sense of the devastating impact the pandemic has had on the restaurant business in Kenya.
Think about it from a staffing level. You've designed a restaurant a restaurant is staffed to cater for a certain number of people. And you then overnight have 80% of those people not there to be served. So what do you do with the teams? So it was really hard felt. So the March, April was largely now trying to adapt to see what does this mean, because no one knew how long the lockdown was going to go for. Like the rest of the world, we were adapting to the great unknown and were taking it day by day.
Right. You covered this a little earlier with respect to takeaway operations. They really do not cover the costs, as it were. But I'm curious to stretch that a little bit further, because as I understand it, the bulk of revenue comes in from sit-in diners. And thankfully, at least in this market, we didn't have an alcohol ban per se. But has this experience strengthened the argument or weakened the argument for dark kitchens?
I think it's definitely strengthened it. in the sense that I would say that you had the market was kind of forced to something that was sitting as a revenue stream at the periphery was then forced onto the market. And as a result, we probably were pushed 3 to 4 years ahead of where we were at pre-pandemic. It would have taken slightly longer for delivery and takeaway to go mainstream. I know retail supermarkets and other retail players have also discovered the same, in that when people were left with no option, they then took up the delivery and takeaway. They had to adopt it in the sense that if you wanted to eat out, you didn't have an option of going to the restaurant. If you were a die-hard sit-in restaurant person, you then and wanted to enjoy a meal, you then had to take the option of ordering in. And as a result, I think we will see in the market. I'm quite excited to see what kind of new brands will evolve from this pandemic, not just globally, but also locally, in that you now have to think about how do we make dark kitchens work. I think there's a space for them. I think the market has adapted to that.
But have we sorted out those last mile delivery issues? Because looking at it, to use the supermarket example that you gave, I remember in the early days of the pandemic, some CEOs in the supermarkets then, I remember having this conversation with Dan Gilroy at Tuskys, and at that point they were trying to set up deliveries pretty much from scratch with virtually nothing. Staff members having to figure out how to get customer orders from point A to deliver them to their homes at a specific point in time. And we're still seeing those complaints about deliveries taking way too long to get to clients on time. Where are the pain points in that last mile delivery chain?
So for us, we had kind of started warming up to that because, as you know, Nairobi specifically and Kenya in general does have quite a few and increasing third-party delivery partners. So those took the bulk of the business to start with. So you know them and you probably use them in the market. So those third-party deliveries took that up, and they have models that are designed to do that. What, of course, most retailers and restaurants were grappling with is that the third-party delivery partners don't do so free of charge. And so there's a cost to it. And if you had delivery and takeaway being a smaller portion and then it increased, so did the cost or the commission due to the third-party delivery.
What sort of commissions are we talking about in this space?
They range between, in a Kenyan context, they range anywhere between 12 to 18%, maybe some delivery partners as high as 20%. But it's all up to, I guess, scale and negotiation ability of the independent restaurant operators.
How does that compare, though, to say the same service being offered in Barcelona or in London?
Based on the trends that I've been reading about, I think you should compare it two ways. One is that what is other markets doing, and I know other markets. We are about the same. Maybe more mature markets are more expensive. Some are here in London and New York going as high as 25 to 30%. But you can compare it now with an internal developed model, because internal developed models tend to go to about 6 to 8%, maybe as high as 10. And that's what you're looking at. And that's why there was a rush to develop different options.
And the digital service tax, of course, that was introduced from the 1st of January, that certainly didn't help matters, did it?
No, it doesn't. And I think there's a whole barrage. I think a conversation needs to be had about the taxes, because let's not forget that it was not only digital service tax. There was 1% minimum tax, which also reared its ugly head in the same space. And it's something that is now being settled or being determined by the courts. But it is a challenge.
CGTN's Ramanyang in conversation with Leonard Mudachi, a former CEO of fast food franchise Big Square. Now, staying in Kenya, the country's flour sector is turning to China's lucrative market in an effort to boost earnings and diversity from traditional markets. But aftershocks from the COVID-19 pandemic are still being felt in the sector despite a rebound. Here's CGTN's Robert Nagila.
It's mid-morning at the Redlands Roses flour firm in Ruiru about 45 kilometers from Nairobi. The first of 3 daily harvests is almost complete. There are over 200 variants of roses grown here in what can be described as a labor-intensive process from the point of planting to boxing. Kenya is the third largest exporter of cut flowers, with Europe accounting for about 70% of its roses. In 2019, flower exports generated about $1 billion in sales. To boost sales, more farms like Redlands have entered the lucrative Chinese market.
We started 5 years ago because it's a very big country, so a big volume of consumers and a big volume of high acquisitive power.
After harvest, the flowers are taken for processing to identify quality roses for export. The flower farm exports spray roses to China. These have more than 1 flower per stem.
Because of the COVID, the business stopped quite a long time in China. We were at about 100 boxes to 200 boxes a week, and currently we are at 100 boxes, but it's increasing.
Like other sectors, flower exports plunged at the onset of the pandemic. But as global markets have reopened, the sector has rebounded. But the after effects are still being felt.
We have a very limited number of cargo planes moving from Kenya to China weekly. So this is really our major problem, is to find freight capacity. It's limiting really our growth in China.
Currently, only China Southern Airlines operates cargo freight between the two countries. Back at Redlands, the final process, boxing the fresh flowers, is underway. From here, they'll be transported to the airport and onto a plane for the Chinese market. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Poor management, crumbling infrastructure, embezzlement and looting, especially during the two Great Congo Wars between 1997 and 2003, left DR Congo's Bakwanga mine crippled by debt and at the mercy of plummeting commodity prices. The mine shut down at the peak of 2008 financial crisis, resuming operations in 2011, but remains a shadow of its former self. Let's take a look at how it's doing.
Bujimai has seen better days. It was once the home of DR Congo's state diamond company, the Bakwanga Mining Company. The town used to be filled with free-spending miners and their families who brought a giddy touch of prosperity to the remote Kasai Oriental province. But at the end of the last century, Bakwanga, locally known as Miba, began to go into a long downward spiral, taking the town with it. Locals are hopeful for a comeback.
The mine is operational, exploitation is underway, but at a minimal level. Mining has resumed with a view to relaunching with the help of the government. $5 million a payment that Gekamin gave to Miba. Excavation equipment was purchased and a complete new plant was bought.
Set up in 1961, Miba is 80% state-owned, while a Belgian company, Cybeca, has a 20% stake. A government audit published in May 2020 revealed serious dysfunction. Last August, President Felix Tshisekedi moved to release $5 million to allow the mining firm to get back on its feet. The first $3 million went to rehabilitating a diamond processing plant at Dizele and the purchase of a new one with an hourly capacity for 200 tons of ore. From an annual output averaging 6 million carats, mainly of industrial diamonds in the early 2000s, production was no more than 500,000 carats in 2008 and half of that in 2011. In the 80s, some 40,000 workers and their families drew their sustenance from the mining company. In contrast, today, Miba owes several months of back pay to its employees.
The government owes Miba a lot of money. It does not have the will to pay this debt. If they pay Miba, Kasai will be much better off.
We are waiting for the salaries for the services rendered to Miba. We do not know our fate. We are like people cast away or refugees. We suffer greatly. Several of us have died without receiving a pension for services rendered.
Operations have resumed in only one of the company's 13 zones. However, it is said it may easily have more than 40 million carats of diamonds and by itself represents 78% of Miba's kimberlite reserves. Meanwhile, the resumption of activity by MEBA appears to have little impact on the people of Mbujumai. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Tunisia's government steps in to support indebted football clubs and sports